So when you meet new people, you normally ask some questions to learn some new things about them. Now, there are some questions you really aren't supposed to ask, but some people ask them anyways. One that I'm used to hearing as a mixed race person is, what are you? And people ask this more politely nowadays than just as blatantly as that, but, you know, my family didn't really have a history, so we never really knew exactly what I was. But Christmas present from my mom, I got Ancestry DNA to tell me what I am. So here it is. Ireland and Scotland, 28%. That's like the same thing, I guess. Look, 1% Mali, or the elusive 1% Greek. Now, I don't go around telling people that I'm Greek, but it's cool to know. But that's really cool. You can spit into a tube, and a month later, you can find out who you are and where you came from. Maybe find out who you are as a person. I don't know. But Ancestry.com, the place that does this, uses a special technique. Now, this is called microarray autosomal DNA testing. This is a very cool graph I drew. Basically, there are two samples. One is you, one is the DNA they're testing against. They split it into RNA. They throw on something that makes it light up, which is cool. And then they throw it into something called the microarray. And then it gives back a scan, and those colored squares tell you if the samples they were testing against matched the gene markers. And however many gene markers you have for a certain place tells you whether or not you're from that place. So I have some gene markers from Greece, which is why I'm 1% Greek, apparently. But that's really cool, but it didn't exist 50 years ago. My parents both have PhDs in genetics. This wasn't around when they got their PhDs. This came around in the 1990s. So, how did this come about? Well, in America, we love our founding fathers. So let's talk about the founding father of genetics, Gregor Mendel. There he is. Now, Gregor Mendel was a monk in the 1850s. He's Austrian, and he spent his time growing pea plants in his monastery. Now, he spent 8 years looking at 7 different traits to find out just what was happening, because they didn't really know. So he built a foundation that all of modern genetics could be built upon. Now, with this foundation built, we could go into the cool, edgy teenage years of genetics. No longer a baby, the field was finding information and puzzle pieces were falling into place. People like Rosalind Franklin, James Watson, and Francis Crick discovered the shape and what DNA was in 1953. People like Frederick Sanger developed new, efficient techniques for DNA sequencing in 1977. The field was suddenly becoming respectable, which is really cool. Suddenly, these ideas could be spread way better. Communication across continents was getting better, and research papers could be read by people on another side of the world. Pea plant growing turned into advanced DNA testing, like, overnight. But, like everything good in this world, humans have found a way to make it controversial. These technologies have led to questions that need to be answered by our society. Now, we aren't going to get into what we believe as individuals today, but it's important to understand that these controversies exist, and it affects the way that scientists can research. Prenatal genetic testing was invented in the 1970s. The doctors look at the DNA of a fetus, and then they can tell you that this fetus may or may not have a potential disability. The choices are you can carry the child to term and have it live with that disability, or you can choose to abort it. Now, that's a crushing decision for any parent to have to make, regardless of where you stand on that debate. But it leads to some really hard questions, like, is it merciful to abort a child that would have lived a painful and hard life, or is it completely unthinkable to think that disabled people wouldn't be able to live a happy, fulfilling life? And then it asks an even harder question, especially in the context of this. What disabilities would be considered okay to live with, and what would be considered too hard to live with? And who gets to decide that answer? And then there's even more controversy. With new technologies such as CRISPR, it gets even weirder. CRISPR is the name of a technique where an enzyme used from certain bacteria and archaea go in with a guide RNA, they latch on to the genome sequence that they want, and it can cut that DNA and it can add or delete whatever it wants. With this, you can potentially make any genome. Now, the ideas with this can be so innocent as changing someone's DNA so they naturally have purple hair. Or it can be so evil and nefarious as deleting entire races from a population. Of course, there's lines to be drawn, but it's really hard to decide who gets to draw these lines. Science is a really cool place to see where ideas and culture can shift in technology, but it brings up a lot of really tough questions. What's really important now is that our society also grows so that it can answer those questions.